And how's it going, everyone? This is Haris Kruskic, BR Live's combat sports reporter, and today we're here with AEW president Tony Khan. Tony, how are you?
Hey, very well. Thanks for having me, Harris. It's nice to meet you.
Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. It's quite the honor.
My
Can
pleasure.
you obviously Fight for the Fallen this Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern on TNT? We'll get to the matches themselves, and we'll get to the state of AEW, but I wanted to ask first and foremost about the charity component to Fight for the Fallen. Can you kind of take us through exactly what the charity component is
Yeah.
what AEW is doing?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to promote the charities. Right now, we've got AEW fightforthefallen.com, where we're taking donations to Florida's First Coast Relief Fund and Feeding Northeast Florida, which are two charities that we picked this year because we really want to focus on the impact of COVID in Florida, and these are charities that we found would make a positive impact. And last year, Fight for the Fallen, we did as a charitable show with live tickets, proceeds going to benefit victims of violent crimes. And this year, because obviously COVID has made it impossible to sell tickets in this climate, we asked fans to step in and make donations and help out if possible. And to lead the way, my family made a donation after the outbreak of $1 million to these charities, Feeding Northeast Florida and Florida's First Coast Relief Fund. And now, at AEW fightforthefallen.com, you can donate. Also at prowrestlingtees.com, we're selling the Fight for the Fallen t-shirt, which has been the #1 t-shirt this week at Pro Wrestling Tees, which is awesome. And all the proceeds from both AEW and Pro Wrestling Tees are going to benefit Florida's First Coast Relief Fund and Feeding Northeast Florida. It's obviously Fight for the Fallen every year. We try to make a positive impact here on our local community here in Jacksonville. And this is obviously COVID this year's made it important more than ever to try and do something helpful.
That's great. What do you think the importance of a company like AEW, how important is it for them to get involved in charity?
I think it's really important. Jaguars and AEW and Fulham, all my family sports clubs, all have a strong emphasis on the charitable foundation. And for AEW, Fight for the Fallen was one of our first shows. It was actually one of the first things we conceived from the beginning, that we would do a charity show in Jacksonville to give back to the local community. When we did our first show, Double or Nothing, in Las Vegas over a year ago, we planned for the original Fight for the Fallen. Yesterday was actually the 1-year anniversary of the inaugural Fight for the Fallen. You can watch that on BR free. So it's a plug, but it's free. So it's on your BR Live service. And Fighter Fest and Fight for the Fallen were huge events for us last summer. And this year we brought them to Dynamite because we didn't have Dynamite last summer. So we worked with BR to put these events on. And Fight for the Fallen, like I said, last year we benefited victims of violent crimes. There had been some tragedies, particularly some gun violence in Jacksonville. Some really tragic stuff happened, and felt really strong that wanted to do a charity show here in Jacksonville. And this year came time to do Fight for the Fallen 2, so to speak. And there was no question, given what's going on with the coronavirus, that we had to try to do something to help.
Absolutely. So now moving on to the matches themselves at Fight for the Fallen this Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. What match, first and foremost, are you most excited for? Because it's a pretty stacked card, I would say, from bottom to the top.
It's certainly Brian Cage versus Jon Moxley for the World Championship. I think the stakes have been raised now that we've seen Brian Cage come in. He's had this great unbeaten run, won the Casino Ladder match against some of our top stars. He put Darby Allin, who's one of our best wrestlers, out of action. And then he's gone on this undefeated run. He attacked Moxley in the parking lot, and we've done all this great stuff leading up to the match. And really now, here's the time for the payoff for everybody. I've been waiting to see this a long time, just like everybody else. And I'm really excited to see Moxley versus Cage. It's something I've wanted to see for a really long time, and it's a dream match for me. I think it's going to be awesome.
Now, we were supposed to see Moxley against Cage at Fyter Fest, but that was moved to Fight for the Fallen. Can you take us into, kind of behind the curtains on what that decision process was like to move it from Fyter Fest to Fight for the Fallen?
Yeah, it was a tough decision, but at the same time, we were in a tough position. But I think once we looked at all the information, it was an easy decision, and we made the right decision. John's wife had been exposed to coronavirus, and then we were already worried, and John was going to get tested. She then tested positive for coronavirus, and John tested negative. We sent John to get tested again, and he got tested again. We got the results back. He was negative again, but still, we felt weird about John traveling out here, and just didn't think it was the right thing to do. And we had Fight for the Fallen. Like I said, it was always planned, and it was a great opportunity to do something special. And really, I think it's worked out great because we had an amazing 2-week Fyter Fest, and now at Fight for the Fallen, you couldn't ask for a bigger match than Jon Moxley versus Brian Cage.
Absolutely. We're about a year and a half into AEW's existence. How do you feel about the current state of AEW through its short history so far?
I feel really strongly about what we're doing. I love, the run we've had on Dynamite. I think we were doing our strongest business before the coronavirus outbreak. And really 2020 was such a huge year for us because we extended our media rights with Warner Media. And, Dynamite extended for 4 years. And, into end of 2023, December 2023. So it's like we added 4 years to, now we got 3.5 left. And this past half year started so great. Revolution, that run to Revolution, and then immediately after we're so hot with Jon Moxley winning the championship and the build to Jon Moxley winning the championship, and Revolution top to bottom when, Hangman and Kenny versus the Young Bucks, one of the greatest matches ever, I think, in America. Definitely one of the greatest matches we've ever had in AEW. And then to have Cody and MJF, and to have so many great matches on the show. Pac and Orange Cassidy was another classic. It was just top to bottom an awesome show. And to be able to do it for me at home, like a couple miles away from my parents' place, about 100 miles away from where I was born, about 100 miles north, but I've lived in Chicago a couple miles from the arena where the show was. So that was pretty cool too. And that was one of the great days I've ever had, and for a lot of reasons. Fulham went on a good run that week, and they played Wednesday, Saturday, and we had Dynamite on Wednesday, and we had Revolution on Saturday. And Fulham won against Swansea and Preston, and we had this great run of shows. I was really happy with it. And then, of course, like everybody else, coronavirus punched all of us in the face across every business and every industry, and almost every part of the world. And here in America, we've been hit really hard by it. And for AEW, we tried to find a way to safely continue and put together shows. And we've now put together a protocol, which you alluded to when we talk about why John wasn't here, why we'd reschedule a match. It was an easy decision to make. And frankly, while Taz and Brian Cage may have, complained on the show, they're pretty professional, and I think they understood. So I'm really excited for that match. But I think as we preview the whole card, I don't want to sell anything short because there's a bunch of dream matches on this show. And we're made more news even today and into the last 24 hours leading up to the show. So we could talk it all through if you want, man.
We can absolutely talk it all through. When you say, we mentioned the past year and a half of AEW's existence. If you had to point to one moment in particular, just one where you're like, you know what, that was the biggest moment so far, what would you say in your opinion?
The biggest moment was the biggest moment in AEW is probably extending our media rights. Getting on TNT in the first place and then extending the media rights would be, in terms of the state of the company. But if you want like a milestone moment on screen, I think when Jon Moxley showed up at the end of Double or Nothing, because I think Double or Nothing was such a classic show. And it was like, this has been such a great pay-per-view, such a great way to start a company and introduce all of these great stars to people, and then bring back stars that most wrestling fans, almost every wrestling fan is going to be familiar with, Chris Jericho and Dustin Rhodes. But, and Cody had wrestled around the world. Kenny and the Young Bucks, I think if you're a hardcore wrestling fan, you knew them very well, that they're some of the best wrestlers in the world. And I think there were a lot of people that had probably heard of Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks before Dynamite and AEW, that, now they're very familiar with them. And I think they built an even bigger, wider audience with how great they are. But I think Double or Nothing, introduced them to some people, although a lot of the people buying it would be very familiar. Clearly, they'd built a fan base in America. But when Moxley showed up at the end, it was like there had to be a big payoff. There was only 2 people it could be, and he was one of them. And it had to be that. It wouldn't have been the same without him. And Chris Jericho is a creative genius, and Chris Jericho had a lot of great ideas for presentation going into that show. Chris Jericho versus Kenny Omega was an awesome match. They're both geniuses about presentation, but Chris, going into this show in particular, had some great ideas. And the way the show went with John coming in and wreaking havoc on Chris, and then having that brawl with Kenny up to the poker chips, and the way we ended, that was probably the culmination of a lot of great stuff to me. But then in terms of the business, I think the thing we'll remember is very significant is within less than 2 months of the virus outbreak shutting down this country and most of this country and certainly many other countries, and the world economy and so many other terrible consequences and all the terrible things that have happened because of Corona. We also were very fortunate, I think, to get that deal signed less than 2 months before that. And it could have been a lot different if we didn't. So,
absolutely. Even with all the success that AEW's had the past year and a half, there's always room for improvement in every business. What would you say, going forward, is something that you'd like to improve on?
Something I'd like to improve on, and that's a great question. Something I'd like to improve on is I'd like to keep expanding. I think we found a great roster, but I don't think people should expect that, you'll never see more people debuting or that this is it. I think we're constantly evolving. We've brought some of the great stars in wrestling in. We've introduced some of the great new stars in wrestling. In addition to guys that I think were household names in wrestling and guys that their names had really grown to where they were evolving towards household status. We got a bunch of young stars that people weren't familiar with, I think, coming in unless you were a real hardcore fan. But now you talk about MJF. MJF's a huge factor in the world of wrestling. And we've had a big impact made by Darby Allin, Jungle Boy, Orange Cassidy, and the Best Friends, and a lot of other people that have come in and done really well for us. So what I'd like to do is take the best of what we have, and then I wouldn't be surprised if you see more new people and more new faces.
Very exciting. I'm sure.
Ricki Starts was a great signing. That was totally organic too. Ricki Starks was a person who'd earned an opportunity and was like somebody when we're looking to bring outside people in to challenge for the TNT Championship against Cody. Ricki Starts was on a list of names, and when I talked it through with Cody had put together, with Arn Anderson and talking through like a list of people, and Cody and I talk, and that was a great idea, and that was on the list of that group of people. That was my favorite person, but I didn't have any idea for Ricki Starks or any plan for Ricki Starks until I saw him against Cody, and then it was like a light bulb went off, and it was like, we can do a lot with this guy. I liked him, but I'd never seen him wrestle in person before. I'd only seen him on YouTube. So he's, that's a good example, but I think there's going to be some other guys, maybe people you'd even be more familiar with down the line. So I look to constantly evolve the roster and evolve the show. But I think people are certainly really, really pumped about the card at hand. So at the same time, we have such a great roster. It'd be tough to bring more people in, but I think I will always be looking to do that.
You mentioned the open challenge. It's happening this Wednesday, Sonny Kiss against Cody. We spoke to Sonny yesterday, actually, and he is incredibly excited about the match at hand. What would you say to fans that might not be, completely familiar with Sonny? We've seen him in spots, with Joey and
either way
last year. But how do you think that people should, feel about Sonny taking on Cody?
Well, I think people should be excited about Sonny taking on Cody. Sonny's awesome and a great athlete. A year ago, Sonny was on Fight for the Fallen in the opening match of the buy-in against Peter Avalon, and Sonny won that match and made this great flashy entrance with the Jaguars cheerleaders. And tomorrow, I would look for Sonny to put on another great showing. And Sonny's definitely a worthy person. This one was kind of the opposite of the other one, whereas Ricki Starks, Cody put a list of guys together and was like, what do you think of these guys? And I was like, Ricki Starks. I put a list of guys together and Sonny was nice. It's like, Sonny, that's great. So I strongly believe in Sonny, which is why, I also strongly push Sonny for this match. I think Sonny's really one of our best athletes and has come really more aggressive since teaming with Joey, which is one of the small silver linings of this whole thing in the pandemic, is that there were some people that hadn't been on TV as much and had to rethink what they were doing. And Sonny, look, I'll be honest, like Sonny and Joey, like when they came in, I asked Sonny and Joey to kind of get together and start teaming. I thought they'd be a great team. And I think we've really fallen into something great. And then they've built something. The video they did was tremendous. There's a longer version of it that's even better that got online, I believe. And those guys really, Sonny and Joey, they have a lot of chemistry as a team that nobody expected they'd have. But they've also really boosted each other, I think, as singles wrestlers. And I really enjoyed Joey's match with Lance Archer at Fyter Fest. And I'm excited now. I think Sonny's got a great opportunity here with Cody, and I think it's going to be a great match.
Going further down the card, FTR against the Lucha Brothers on Wednesday. FTR, since they've joined AEW, have just been on an absolute tear. What impact have you seen them have on the tag team division outside of the ring? Obviously, we've seen the demolition they've made inside of it, but what about outside? Huge impact that they made on the tag team division. I'm a big believer in them also. They're really some of the top free agents in wrestling, and what they've come in and added to AEW. When I talk about trying to evolve and expand the roster, I mean, that's a perfect example. I think we had the best tag team division in wrestling before they came in. And then now that they're a part of it, I think they've lifted everybody's game. And the competition's that much more fierce. We have great champions with Hangman and Kenny that have really beaten a lot of top competition. I mean, when you look back, Hangman and Kenny had the classic match we spoke about a few minutes ago with the Young Bucks at Revolution. They've taken down Private Party. They've beaten a lot of the top teams here, the Best Friends and the Natural Nightmares. And we've really seen them have this like great run. And I think there's a lot of challengers. I'd like to see another, frankly, Kenny and Hangman Young Bucks match. I thought that was the best tag match I've ever seen, certainly the best tag match I've ever seen in America. And which is like, that's pretty high praise, but I'm not the only one that thinks that. And then I also would love to see either team against FTR. And I think that FTR also now with the Lucha Brothers have run into a team that, like we saw last week with the Butcher and the Blade, and the Lucha Brothers are kind of the X Factor tag team here, because the Lucha Brothers, as we saw with their matches with the Young Bucks at Double or Nothing and All Out, are also one of the best tag teams here. This is a dream match. I think I've seen people who are credible wrestling reporters, credible wrestling critics, that said that this is the match they're the most excited about. And I could totally see that. As a tag team wrestling fan, I'm tempted to say that it's also the match I'm the most excited about. FTR and the Lucha Brothers is going to be an awesome match. And they, like I said, they forced everybody to step up their game, including the Lucha Brothers, which is great having Pentagon back with us now that people are able to come in from Mexico. Moving along with the card, the Elite against the Jurassic Express. This is a really cool matchup because it's three very, well-established wrestlers, for years now against three very important up-and-comers, and I think very important to AEW's future. How do you feel about this match?
These are two of the top trios units in our company. We've, six-man tags have been a huge part of AEW since the beginning. We featured, SCU against the Strong Hearts at Double or Nothing, and we've done so many six-man tags. The aforementioned Orange Cassidy and the Best Friends, the Jurassic Express, obviously, and the Elite are two of the top units. And we've got a bunch of dream units, and I think we could someday have a great trios tournament of some kind. I also think that this could be one of the biggest matches in that tournament. We're seeing it right now. If it were ever to happen, I think the Elite and the Jurassic Express could be odds-on favorites, and they're two of the most popular teams in AEW. So I think it's going to be a really fun match, and I'm really excited about it. They've both been on a good run. The Elite have done very well. Kenny and Hangman, great champions, and they won the Stadium Stampede, and that was huge at Double or Nothing. And then we've seen Jurassic Express is huge for them to beat MJF and Wardlow in the tag match at Fyter Fest.
Absolutely. Next, we have the newly established Nightmare Sisters, Brandy Rhodes and Allie. As dysfunctional as they may seem, they seem to be winning a lot of matches against a to-be-announced team at Fight for the Fallen. What's going on with the Nightmare Sisters? What do you make of them?
So last year at the inaugural Fight for the Fallen, which yesterday was actually the 1-year anniversary of the inaugural Fight for the Fallen, Brandy and Allie were opponents, and now tonight, 1 year later, they are teammates, and they're undefeated, and they're on this great run as a team. So we'll see the Nightmare Sisters in action, and Dustin Rhodes has been a great coach for them. And he gave him some good advice that they're on this run. You should ride it out and see if you could stay hot and keep winning matches. And so that's been pretty cool. And I'm excited for their match too. We've, had some great stuff in the women's division recently, and I think this is a great opportunity to see women's tag teams.
And hot off the press, Chris Jericho will be making an appearance and getting himself involved in Fight for the Fallen. What can we expect there?
That's going to be awesome. Chris is going to be on the show a good amount, a lot actually, because Chris will have a promo segment in the first hour. We'll hear from Chris, and he's going to talk. But then in the second hour, Chris, the whole second hour is going to be on commentary. So people have really enjoyed Chris on commentary in the shows, and he had done the first hour of the show a couple times, and we're trying to switch it up and have Chris do the second hour and do his own promo in the first hour. So you'll hear a lot from Chris. I can assure you, after his big win against Orange Cassidy, he'll be sure to talk about how Fyter Fest was big for him.
Now I have a more general question for you. Between being president of AEW, a co-owner of the Jaguars, and the general manager of Fulham Football Club, where do you find time to do anything else? I mean, how do you manage to juggle all three of those things that could easily be done, by a group of people, each of them? You manage to do all of them.
I spend all my time on those three things pretty much. I don't have a lot of time for other stuff, but I love the three things I do, and every waking hour is devoted to them, and they're all very important things. And at the Jaguars, in addition to being part of the ownership of my dad and my sister, we also have an analytics department that I started here. It's been almost 9 years. This is my 9th season. And we started this analytics group. And, I'm not the general manager, but I make contributions, I'd like to think. And I spend most of my time with the Jaguars actually outside of the season. During the season, I spend a lot of time with the coaches as far as analytics and situational stuff. In the off season, I spend most of my time scouting for the draft. And I really enjoy that. A lot of the undrafted players on our team, I've, helped identify. And actually in the defensive backs of the Jaguars going into the draft, there were 3 players on last year's roster at the end of the year that were undrafted defensive backs that I found, that I, signed. I called up and signed after the draft because I love to scout defensive backs. I love scouting DBs. And then this year I've signed a couple more. And so we'll see how many of them end up on the 53 at the end of this year, but hopefully at least half the defensive backfield will be guys I found that undrafted that slipped through the cracks of everybody. That'd be cool. Those the 3 players that are on the team right now that were undrafted players I found are Trey Herndon, corner, who led the team in interceptions last year, who's undrafted out of Vanderbilt and didn't really have a lot of attention, and nobody really rated him for the draft. As far as the scouting I'd seen and heard reports, nothing really notable about him people mentioned, but I really loved his game, and I use analytics to identify players, and then I watch video to follow up, and Trey was one of my favorite players in college football. And certainly I thought he was the most underrated player in college football. And then Jared Wilson, another guy I thought was that year maybe the most underrated guy in college football. was a great safety for Michigan, and they had one of the top defenses in America. Now he's our starting free safety and is a big part of the team. And like I said, he's been with us and made contributions on our playoff run as a backup a few years ago. He was playing both some strong safety and free safety when we had injuries to Gibson and Church in the AFC playoffs a few seasons ago. Now he's a starter, and I really like Jared Wilson. And then Brandon Watson, also from Michigan, actually, is another good corner who's really contributed on special teams and plays defensive back for us also. Those three. And then we'll see the other two guys I signed this year, Barku out of San Jose State and Kobe Williams out of Arizona State. So we'll see. But anyway, I really enjoy working with defensive backs and scouting, and I was very fortunate. And I looked at all the draft picks and analyzed through all the rounds. But like for the utility of what I do is probably a lot of it is scouting for undrafted players. I was very fortunate in one sense, like talk about these small silver linings out of this tragedy of coronavirus, that while we were all holed up, we had taped a lot of shows for the month of April, and I wasn't doing a live show every week. Now we're back to doing live shows. We'll be live tonight with Fight for the Fallen. But in April, a lot of the shows were taped, and I was really just editing, and it's very, very time consuming, especially when, putting everything together on the fly like I was. It was difficult for sure. But for AEW, the month of April was probably actually less time consuming because we were doing like a new show every week. And that allowed me to spend a lot of time on the draft. And even though I wasn't on the road scouting like I have in past years because there were no pro days, I had gone on the road and scouted a lot of college games in this past year and years past. So that benefited. I went to the combine and, we talked to the players and we had all the information about player workouts. So, there's a few hundred guys there. But anyway, to your question, and then at Fulham Football Club, being the general manager, sporting director, and director of football is everything to me also. Sometimes people ask me how I juggle these things like you have, and it's like if I had a bunch of children, I wouldn't pick a favorite or spend all my time on one. You have to take care of all your kids, and I think these are my family businesses. And in the case of Fulham and AEW, I'm responsible for everything that happens at AEW, everything, and certainly at Fulham as an owner, I'm responsible for everything that happens, but also for the on-field product, I'm the person directly responsible for the quality of our players and for the business we do. And I think our players are very strong right now, and we're in great position, hopefully, to return to the Premier League at the end of this campaign. It's looking pretty good. The guys are in great form, and right now we have everything to play for with a couple games to go and possibly the playoffs ahead. And then AEW. AEW also, I live for this, and it's my favorite thing. I can't imagine a world without it. And at the same time, certainly it was very time consuming before AEW with Fulham and the Jaguars. But there had always been this void, I think, in my professional life that wrestling was the one thing between Fulham and the Jaguars, I would work all the time, but late at night I would watch wrestling if I could, and I would try to catch up on whatever was going on. That was the one thing I would always allow myself. Now I don't have that. Now I have that, but I don't have it. It's not like a hobby. There's nothing I really do as a hobby anymore. Like everything's either wrestling or Fulham or Jaguars work. So I love it though. It's great.
Tony, the gears in your head spin faster than anyone I have ever spoken to ever. The way you process information is just very, very different, just from everyone that I've talked to at AEW. I just want you to know that. There's nothing that you really need to say. I just thought it was interesting. You're a very interesting person to talk to, the way you process information. I appreciate having different people on. You're welcome. So last prediction for you, non-AEW. Are we going to have football in fall? Do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, I do. I don't know how we're going to deal with the issue of fans in the stands, and certainly there's going to have to be some provisions to make sure it's a safe environment for all the players and coaches and staff, all of us here. But I do think there's going to be football in the fall. We're all working towards it, and I fully expect there's going to be NFL football on television. And as far as for the ticket holders and the live events. I can't predict the future of that or any other sport. I know Fulham right now, we're playing without fans. I think the Jaguars are anticipating that we're going to try to find a way to get fans in safely, and we'll see how it all works out. But obviously, safety is first and foremost. And for Fulham and AEW, we are doing shows right now at AEW, and Fulham is playing football, and we're doing that by testing regularly before we compete.
Again, Fight for the Fallen this Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern on TNT. Tony, thank you so much for all this time. Typically, our interviews are, 10 to 15 minutes, but I very much appreciate all your patience and answering every question I had. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Harris. I'm sorry. Thank you for letting me go on, and I really enjoyed doing it. Hopefully, I'll see you again, either talking hopefully AEW or football, and hopefully talking a Fulham promotion.
Hopefully. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Thank you, Tony, so much. Again, appreciate it.
Thank you, Harris.